everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Institute of Virtual Lunch and Learn series. Very excited today to welcome Jessie States from Meeting Planners International to join us for a conversation about where we stand with virtual and what their experiences have been over the last year. Jessie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
A pleasure. Jessie, we had a chance to catch up a little bit before we hit the old record button, but share with our audience, what's your role at MPI and kind of what's the perspective that you guys have had sort of on this changed landscape for events?
Yeah, so my role at MPI Academy is overseeing all of the education that happens at Meeting Professionals International. That includes all of our in-person learning experiences, as well as our digital learning and our certificate programs. So anything related to education that happens at MPI comes through my team. And just to introduce MPI a little bit more, we are the largest association of people that plan meetings, events, conferences in the world. We have 15,000 members who are part of the event management community and an additional 60,000 kind of our community members. So we are looking at the events landscape and how that's changing due to the current crisis. And we're also kind of leading the charge in what the future of meetings looks like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What a cool perspective, because if there's a community out there that we all have a lot to learn, it's meeting professionals, right? I mean, there's so much change that we've all witnessed. Now you focus on education. So I guess I'm curious twofold. How did your goals and your orientation for sharing knowledge over the last year shift, or what did you guys do to adapt? And what kind of lessons are you trying to share with your membership to help them have success in this new climate?
We were really lucky, I guess, or maybe strategic when you think about it in the, from hindsight, that we moved a great deal of our education online in 2019. So where we had been hosting a lot of individual educational events regionally, we took that on our side and we moved those into digital formats. We have a network of chapters that do regional events. So we wanted to empower those regional chapters to host education on the regional level. And from the international perspective, we took on the mantle of hosting all of our digital education. So we were well equipped and enabled to kind of pivot, as it were, when kind of in-person meetings went away for a while.
An amazing situation that you guys were kind of teed up to manage this, which I guess, in some sense makes sense. We have access to all this technology now, so you guys were kind of forward thinking about how you can use it and marry it with your chapter model. When you made that pivot, what can we talk about? I guess talk to us about what did you guys do as you moved from those in-person events to the online, I guess, just so we can kind of understand what your journey started to look like.
Sure. So what we really wanted to do was take a look at what it is that we were trying to accomplish. And there are so many amazing technologies out there, so many platforms that you can utilize in order to share digital education, to move into this online space, that we first really had to evaluate what it was that we were trying to accomplish. And trying to understand and navigate the digital marketplace to see where these new technologies could help us to fill the needs of our community. And like many of us, we started with the tools that we were already using. So Zoom meetings and Zoom webinar became one of the first kind of weapons in our arsenal or platforms that we had in order to kind of start to facilitate some online learning. And really understanding the different tools that were within that platform that could help us to really facilitate engagement, which is the one thing that is the most lacking when it comes to these kinds of digital experiences, is how do we really make connections in a digital world? And that is kind of the hardest nut, I think, to crack. It's really easy to do some of the broadcasts that you often see, just having keynotes or panelists or concurrent sessions, and you're just kind of one-way communication to a digital audience. That's kind of the lowest level of online or digital experience design. How do you really kind of move away from that and into the different levels of engagement has been something that we're uniquely focused on.
Very interesting. So many questions that come to mind. I guess I'm curious, you started with the tools that you had. How did it progress and evolve? You mentioned the technologies that you looked at and the platforms and trying to crack that nut of engagement. First question I'm going to say is, did you crack the nut of engagement, or is it still a work in progress?
I think it's always going to be a work in progress. And I think as we continue to look at all of the different platforms that are out there that offer really unique opportunities for engagement, there's everything from screens where people, can set up different conversation pods that you can pop in and out of, to places where, where you really are just watching a broadcast and chatting to the side. And so really the first question that you ask yourself is, what am I trying to accomplish? What is the method that we want to use to accomplish that? How much digital engagement do we want to have? And then what platforms can help us to reach that level of engagement? So it all starts like it always does with your goals and objectives, and then try to figure out how do we create the experience that we want to have. And so, we've done demos with hundreds of different platforms to try to see what works best for our community. And also, the other thing to keep in mind is who your audience is and what level of technological savvy they have. Because what you don't want to do is go with a platform that's so advanced that it actually kind of precludes people from engaging in ways that they can understand. So a lot of the decision making has been, how easy is this to use? Does it require it to be something to be downloaded? Does it require a level of technical expertise? Some of these platforms are amazing. We've used a 3D virtual world where people could, have an avatar and walk around and jump and sing together. But not everyone is ready for that kind of level of engagement. So who's your audience, and how do they like to interact with each other? And what kind of tech tools would they be most liable to understand really easily and really well for that user experience?
Yeah, I love that answer, and I'm going to promise our audience now there'll be no singing here because no one needs to hear that out of me. So
we did a karaoke with avatars.
Oh boy, that sounds pretty cool, actually. So I think you said this, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, because we've had different conversations with folks in the industry. I feel that you start with the technology and then define the experience, or do you start with thinking about what your event looks and feels like and then find the right tools? Do you have an opinion on which way to go? Does it matter?
Yeah, I believe that you should absolutely start with designing the experience and then find a platform that works best for that experience. It's just like we were talking earlier, your platform is your facility. So think of it as your hotel or your destination.
Sure.
You don't pick your hotel or your destination, or you don't want to. Sometimes you're forced to, but you don't want to pick your hotel or your destination first. You want to decide what kind of experience you want to have, and then you pick the facilities or the destination that fulfills on that goal or objective. So really establishing that first is the most important thing. And then you can pick your platform, because there are dozens of amazing platforms out there, and there is no way that you could make the right decision for the right platform, the right price, all of those different things. You couldn't make the right decision unless you knew what your experience was going to look like.
Yeah, and so that kind of begs the question, kind of as you guys went along and sort of the process evolved. And I know you guys produced a hybrid event. You didn't go completely virtual, and I really want to dive into that in a second. But before we get there, what level of engagement or what tool set did you find made the most sense? Like, what features were you thinking would help the community the most? Because I think as some of our audience listens and they think about moving beyond Zoom, and they think about what does the next evolution of their virtual experience look and feel like, what are I think it's interesting to hear what kinds of interactivity and what kinds of tool sets you guys found to be helpful, and maybe the why. What was the why there?
Yeah, so we actually went with for our digital experience that was part of our hybrid events. We had a portion of our audience was in person and a portion of it was digital. We utilized our production partner, Freeman, this past year They have a platform that has a digital trade show element that allowed people to make appointments with exhibitors. They had a number of different opportunities for people to connect one-on-one with each other, to create group appointments and things like that. And so we wanted them to be able to have that opportunity. There also was a typical chat that sits alongside their player and things like that. That was perfect for our keynotes, because those are really one-way deliveries in any case. So,
Sure.
the in-person audience is also just sitting and listening. But for our parallel, our concurrent sessions, we actually linked back out of the platform back to Zoom. And the reason that we did that was because we wanted the breakout capabilities, and we wanted our participants to be able to see each other. And so we actually linked back out to a different technology for the breakouts because of that. So the decision we made was that, engagement was more important to us in those particular sessions. We wanted the speaker to speak directly to the audience, and the audience to be able to speak back to the speaker, and for them to be able to go in and have discussions and conversations with each other. And so, that's what I mean when we're kind of taking a look at the technologies that are out there and trying to navigate the ecosystem to see which ones play well together, which ones accomplish what you want to do. For our particular audience, they're not always as tech savvy. They're becoming more and more out of need now, but they haven't in the past always been as technological savvy, and they're also not really known as first adopters. So we've had to make decisions based on their level of knowledge in these areas, and we wanted to break down any barriers that technology might bring with it, to enable them to do what we needed them to do, which was to engage with each other.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I'm hearing a couple of key points come out of what you're saying. One is that the type of experience you were producing varied based on the kind of content, whether it was a keynote or if it was a breakout. You wanted the user experience to be different. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, just like it would in a real life event. You wouldn't host one of your concurrent sessions from a theater stage, right? So you wouldn't
Absolutely.
necessarily have that same experience in the digital realm. So I think, a couple of things is, really understanding what your experience you want it to look like, and then understanding who your audience is and how they interact with each other, and what level of interaction they're accustomed to, are really important parts of the process.
The other thing that I'm hearing you say, which I think there's been a little bit of a debate going on in the community, is do we look for, once we've done our creative and we've thought about the experience we're trying to produce, and we move on to platform, do we look for a one size fits all, or do we look for a best of breed of bringing together the different tool sets? And to use the analogy of the venue, in a traditional event, you would bring in different vendors for AV and for catering and for printing and signage and all these different things, and you'd bring in a best of breed. And now within the digital world, there seems to be a little bit of a rush to try and find a one size fits all platform, which makes a lot of sense in some capacity. But I also think that we are seeing these kinds of interactive tools and all these things evolve where you can bring in a best of breed. And it sounds like that's kind of the venue, the avenue that you went. Is that correct?
For that particular event. But for other events, we found tools that were right fit without having any kind of integrations with other technologies. So I think it's case by case. A lot of times you will find the perfect platform for the perfect event. If you're doing a cocktail hour, there might be a platform that is absolutely perfect for that. If you're doing a fundraising event, there may be another platform. I've used and spoken at with probably a dozen different platforms over the past year that were all amazing platforms. And so it's really trying to create a list of all of the criteria associated with your event, looking at those criteria and rating them about how important each of those are, and then going out to RFP, just like you would for a hotel, and seeing which technologies fit best.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think seeing, as you're saying it, it's so true. And we talk about this a lot here at the Institute, is that there are so many different technologies that we're getting to observe mature and develop right from under our toes. So it's such an interesting time to really kind of see the evolution of a whole new industry and a whole new sector. As we march toward talking about your hybrid event from November, I'm curious if we could start off talking a little bit about the process of getting there. So you go from a traditional event, and you guys had started making that pivot a year earlier with bringing some things online. But what was different or what was the same about the process? Because I'll share a bias as to where this question is coming from. We hear from a lot of people that think, oh, it's digital or it's virtual. It's less than, it's easier. We don't need as many folks in the mix. And I think that, I'll raise my hand and say I don't agree. So I want to try and get your sense, though, from working in the field.
We went from planning one event to planning 2 events. And so it required double the amount of hours, double the amount of time, probably triple the amount of people, because when you move into that digital space, you need additional moderation, particularly the more engagement that you have, the more people that you need to have kind of moderating all of that, making sure that everyone's questions are being answered, particularly in digital environments. So I 100% agree with you that this isn't something like you could just kind of like add on. You're planning 2 separate experiences with 2 separate user groups. The in-person audience has their own experience, and the digital audience has its own experience, which requires a similar amount of staff in order to really pull that off. And we had talked about that in the past. Experiencing is a completely different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so you guys are in a very interesting position, and I'm really grateful we get to share your perspective with our membership, because you guys have kind of gone where we think the industry is going, which is to hybrid events. We think that there's so much value to online, virtual, and digital events. Of course, human beings, we're going to want to go back to that traditional meeting event and being face-to-face and being able to shake hands or bump arms, as it may be these days. But you guys actually put on a hybrid event in November. Talk to us a little bit about what did that look and feel like, both from a logistical perspective, an attendance perspective, and then, of course, results.
So we had 650 people on site at the Gaylord Texan in Grapevine, Texas in early November. And that involved an entire set of protocols in order to make that happen, to ensure the health and safety of everybody who was on site. And then we had another 1,100 people who attended that event digitally. And they had shared experiences at certain times, and at other times they were doing completely different things. And so managing that and determining what both of those experiences looked like was our first challenge, was really understanding what moments will these 2 events share and what moments will they have that are different. For example, we had 17 different countries that attended the digital experience in a lot of different time zones. So what was the experience? What did that look like when it came to the in-person lunch? Obviously, it's not lunch everywhere. So what is our digital audience enabled to do during that time when the in-person audience was having their lunch? So it's taking a look first at the different schedules for the 2 different events and determining what's happening at what times and what experiences they're sharing and what experiences they have that are different from one another.
And in the virtual or the digital attendees, it strikes me that you also have to be mindful. You're not, to your point, you're not entirely recreating what's happening on the ground. You're not giving them lunch. You're perhaps having more digestible content. You're making different pieces of content available during that time. How did you guys tackle that? Drill in a little bit more specifically, because that workflow of showing up at a 9 a.m. event that runs until 5, you can't really do that with somebody sitting in a computer. So how do you tackle that for the digital experience?
Yeah, a couple of things. So to address the lunch specifically, we did a midday TV show. So we had a studio. It actually had a clear background so that the digital audience could see the lobby where people were walking around. They could see our safety protocols, which is something that our audience was really interested in. And we had 2 anchors, and the 2 anchors hosted a TV show. We did interviews with keynotes, with key industry leaders, with subject matter experts. And that kind of talk show was only for the digital audience, was recorded so the in-person audience can see it later, but that was very specific, a digital element that was just for the digital audience. One thing that we struggled with, and I think we're going to continue to struggle with until our audiences become more comfortable with these digital experiences, is that our audience really felt compelled to like attend every element of the event. And it was never our intent for our digital attendees to kind of sit in front of their screen for 8 hours a day for 3 days, experiencing this event. We really tried to over communicate everything, all of the different elements of the event, so that they could make really strategic choices about what they wanted to attend, how they wanted to experience the event, enabling them to know that everything would be recorded. So if they wanted to sit in the chat all day, or if they just wanted to make appointments with their peers for the next 3 days, they could do that and know that the content of the sessions was recorded. But we still felt that angst from our audience, that they really felt like they were being compelled to attend this experience the way we were dictating it, as opposed to curating their unique, engaging experience for themselves. So I think that that's one component that we really want to over communicate with our digital attendees, is that this is customizable for you. There are elements that you may be more interested than others. You may need to take a break or go to a meeting, and that's okay. Really helping our audience to feel comfortable with curating an experience that gives them the ROI that they're looking for.
Yeah, and I guess, kind of moving forward, we are not just creating events that are siloed on specific dates and times, but perhaps creating experiences that have more long tail reach, and that somebody can come for those live days and interact and set appointments and whatnot. But then there's this wealth of knowledge that's available to them as a content hub, really on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. There's so many different ways we can design experiences now. Whether or not you want to take your annual conference and still host on those days, but then also, curate that over the course of months or the year, with a series of cocktail hours or lunch and learns like you're doing now. How do those play into your main event or your brand strategy, or moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. We glossed over, but I want to go back to your attendance. I mean, your attendance numbers were phenomenal, both from the in-person experience, but also digitally. We're hearing from a lot of people that this kind of online engagement is opening new doors, both for accessibility and for reaching global audiences, and really breaking down some barriers that traditionally existed. I suppose you guys experienced that firsthand with your numbers that you had in November.
We did, and we had to take that international audience into account when we designed the experience. We were able to partner with a captioning and translation service called Wordly that used an iframe integration that connected directly into the chat window when it came to the player. And also integrates directly into Zoom. And so that really helped us to internationalize and really be more accessible, both in terms of accessibility, but also language barriers for our attendees.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so many different things that come into play. Even you mentioned earlier, like the time zones and kind of playing to these global audiences are really changes the dynamic of the thinking, especially for the hybrid, the online. Keeping an eye on the clock here, you mentioned what you guys are struggling with, and I always feel like we learn a lot from other people's both successes and failures. It sounds like you had a hugely successful hybrid event, and it sounds like you struggled with sort of managing that online experience for the digital attendees. Were there any other lessons learned or high-level pieces of the puzzle that you might share with our audience as they think about their own strategies going forward?
One decision that we made was that we wanted to do everything live. That meant that even for our digital audience, none of the sessions were recorded. And that was a risk that we took. It was a risk that we understood the nature of. We then had the fire alarm go off at the venue, and
Right.
all of our rooms had to be evacuated, which meant communicating with the digital audience what was happening and why they were being kicked out of the digital rooms. But we felt that the engagement, being able to connect with the speaker directly and ask questions and connect that way was more important than the possibility that we might have some kind of a tech challenge. And so we still believe that that was the right decision, but it's for every organization to kind of decide what makes most sense for them when it comes to the balance between live and digital recording of content. The other decision that we made that was a little bit different than what you might imagine from some events is that for our concurrent sessions, we did not record them and stream them from the back of the room out to our digital audience. I actually asked all of our speakers to do their session twice, once for the in-person audience, and then I had rooms set up with cameras, lighting, and green screens. And I asked them to do their session again for the digital audience. And most of our speakers actually agreed to do that, which I was so thankful for, because again, it was really important for me for the digital audience to feel like this was an event that was planned for them.
Interesting, really interesting. And I want to be mindful of the clock, but I want to just drill in a little bit on that. So the rooms where you would re-record the panel discussions, did you lose some of the energy of the live and the interactivity in the room, or how were you able to preserve that energy? And my bias is toward going live, but agree with you that things have to have a balance. But how did you navigate that, where you're re-recording it to make sure the digital audience gets a firsthand experience, but how do you also include that live energy?
Yeah, so some of our sessions, like our general sessions, those everyone attended together, and they felt that energy. We actually did some fan cams, almost like you see if you watch the NFL draft or WWE. We had fan cams, so our digital audience was being seen by our in-person audience. We also had a giant iPad on the stage where we brought in some of our digital attendees to ask questions. We had a live MC and a digital MC who interacted with each other on the main stage, and then we connected everybody as much as we could via social channels and things like that, so that they were able to experience the event together. It was during the concurrent sessions that they had separate experiences where the digital audience was able to ask questions directly to speakers, where they were able to see each other on the stage and really, on the screen, and really interact with each other in a unique way. And so that's kind of how we manage that when I talk about kind of like where are the shared experiences where everybody comes together, and then what makes the most sense where you have some different experiences for the two different audiences.
You guys knocked it out of the park on year one of going digital and everyone experiencing virtual. So I can only imagine the experience you'll produce this year and having this conversation a year from now. Jessie, keeping in mind the clock, we should wrap up here, but any final thoughts, anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to share with our audience? You just have such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to going hybrid. So I want to make sure we hear anything from you that you'd like to share.
I think that the message that they both of us agree on is that hybrid events are here to stay. And we're going to go back to hosting meetings where there are people in spaces together. And I'm so excited that we were able to do that in November, and that we're hoping that the conditions are right. We know that they will be, to do that again in June of this year. But the hybrid portion of our event, the digital event, is not going away. That reach for our brand, for our people, bringing our community together, particularly those who can't travel to come join us, or who, for whatever reason, are unable to do that. We want them to come to our event too. And so that is something that's going to stick around. We don't see that changing in the near or midterm. Who knows for the long term what we might predict for events to look like in 10 years. But we think that the hybrid element to events is here to stay.
Agreed. I think it's an exciting journey that marketing, event professionals, and technologists are all on here. And that's sort of our goal at the Institute here, is to bring us all together and kind of have a shared vision for the future. Jessie, thank you so much for joining us today. We wish you all the best in 2021 and beyond. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you.
We'll be back real soon with another episode of the Institute of Virtual Lunch and Learn series. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.